Role of Onboarding, Education for Healthcare Risk Professionals with Robin Lynch. Our partner today is MedIQ. At this time, all lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. I know Robin has included some poll questions within, so that's also a consideration. You can also type your questions using the pane at the right of your screen. If you'd like this presentation, visit the handout section, also on the right. This webinar is being recorded and will be available at the partner YouTube channel within a couple of business days. Robin will provide excellent information today. She is the Quality, Risk, and Patient Safety Manager at MedIQ. Robin was awarded her Master of Science in Nursing Education from the State University of New York Institute of Technology and her Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from the University of Texas in Austin. Robin holds certifications in simulation education, patient safety, and human factors in healthcare. She has presented at national and regional risk, patient safety, and simulation conferences and developed custom client content on topics including clinical debriefing, care transitions, workplace violence, diagnostic accuracy, curriculum design, and change management. Robin served as a contributing author of Ashram's Failure Mode and Effects Analytics FMEA playbook, and as a subject matter expert in the development of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement's Human Factors and Healthcare Certification exam. Most recently, she designed a hybrid workshop on facilitating effective root cause analysis from human factor lens. Wow. It is my pleasure to turn the mic over to Robin. Robin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And I hear it's being posted on YouTube. So wow, this is gonna be I'm gonna be YouTube famous, right? So welcome everyone. My name is Robin Lynch. And as Michelle said, I'm the Quality Risk Patient Safety Manager at MedIQ. And during our time together today, we are going to discuss the vital role of onboarding education for healthcare risk professionals. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background here. I began my career as a pediatric nurse and then returned to school for nursing education, which kind of led me into teaching with simulation because that was the shiny bells and whistles. That was the brand new thing in education. And I used simulation to teach in both the academic, like the School of Nursing, and academic medical centers. During my tenure in simulation, I really got excited about the work of risk and patient safety. However, my onboarding experience for my first role as a risk professional was not so great. I was actually provided a giant binder. It was probably about 8 inches thick after all the information had stuffed in there, and it included printouts of every email to and from our hospital's legal counsel. As you can imagine, this is not the ideal way to learn about such a complex topic of risk management, right? So this presentation is intended to highlight where similar gaps exist in our organizations and outline how we can do better. And I think for those of you who may be joining that are not risk professionals or may not be in a position to influence this particular function, there are some salient learnings that can be applied to many of the roles in healthcare for which there is not a formal degree program. So during this presentation, as Michelle shared, there are going to be opportunities to respond to some questions. So if you take out your smartphone device and scan the QR code, you can engage in some of those Q&A sessions and those polling activities throughout. And we will also put the QR code on each of the slide questions, but if you put your phone down or navigate away, you're going to have to scan the QR code again. So I want to begin by finding out a little bit more about our audience here today. So who of you are risk professionals? Go ahead, let me know. Okay. So I realize not everyone might be able to scan. Some of you might be also listening to this on your smart devices. So we got a 50-50 mix here of half risk and half non-risk. So for those of you who said you are a risk professional, did you have an orientation specific to risk? Okay. I have some people that are still answering here. Some yes, some no. Okay, so if you had an orientation specific to risk, how well do you feel that it prepared you for the role of a risk professional? Okay, so I think the consensus is not very well. You're very kind to not to not have selected that. You've got to be kidding me, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So in a 2022 poll, which was a lot larger of a group, we polled 114 risk professionals at the Association for the American Society for Healthcare Risk Management annual conference, and 75% reported that they did not have an orientation specific to risk management. And since that 2022 poll, I have continued to ask this question of smaller groups of risk professionals, and the answers remain the same. So when we dig further, asking those 25% who did have an orientation specific to risk, when we asked about the quality of their onboarding education, 53% responded, actually, you've got to be kidding me. So I thought you were very kind when you said that, not very well. So yes, 53% responded, you've got to be kidding me, with like 18% not very well, and about 13% somewhat well. So there's a wide range of what we expect and what we're actually getting here. So our objectives today, and this is why I'm talking with you. At the conclusion of this presentation, we hope that you'll be able to describe the need for this onboarding curriculum for novice risk professionals, identify learning activities that can be included in a risk professional onboarding curriculum, and outline what a week-by-week onboarding curriculum might look like. So think back to your first role, and this might not be as a risk professional for those of you who are not, but think back to your first role as a risk professional or a professional that was maybe a job that was after you were a nurse or a clinician in some way, and then you took a more administrative role. Maybe you're a patient safety professional, maybe you're in compliance, right? Think about that first role. You might have been hired because someone left a position and you had clinical experience and perhaps some additional training, maybe in some patient safety, maybe sat on some task force. Maybe you were an educator or had a previous leadership role. Maybe you were a manager of a unit. You might not have even accepted that role formally. You might have become, a risk professional because it was part of another role, such as, like I said, a compliance officer or a practice manager, or simply fell into the category of other duties as assigned. So when we talk with risk professionals, a lot of risk professionals wear many, many hats. And every role is different at every organization. And so all of those hats makes it really challenging, right? So you likely went through, every employee goes through the new employee orientation. And after that, you get a checklist of things that HR wants to make sure your manager covers. And then you might have been brought to your desk and provided with a staff directory and some policies and procedures and directed to read up on those things. And then you were probably shown how to review your organization's event reports, right? So you're learning that event reporting system. And then as opportunities present themselves, you might be shadowing a fellow risk professional. If you were lucky, if you were at an organization that actually had someone in the position to shadow. Does this sound familiar? So what are risk professionals saying? So this is an excerpt from an actual discussion board in one of our courses in the curriculum we developed on risk management, the risk management development program. And this learner says, in my role in risk management has been very unorganized in the sense that I was placed in the patient safety manager role, and the person who hired me moved a month after I started. In other words, I'm learning as I go and no formal training has occurred. And then what was really interesting, and this course does not actually ask people to respond to discussion posts. This actually occurred naturally. So someone actually responded, "I feel your pain. I was hired into a risk management nurse manager position that didn't exist before me. My role is to build a comprehensive risk management program for our organization's ambulatory sites from the ground up. However, I have no one to train me and no risk management experience. Some days I am desperate to go back to clinical nursing. Others, I feel like I may have an opportunity to make a real difference. I am in the middle of month 3 and still feel very confused. Good luck to you, and I hope you take comfort in knowing that someone else is in the same boat as you." So this speaks volumes about what is actually going on in our organizations, in the real world. So the role of risk professional, which we know is not one that's very easy to learn. You not only need to understand how to perform those daily responsibilities of the event reporting systems and how to do some of the reports out that you need to report. And you might be wearing those additional hats that I mentioned that some other organizations might not have risk professionals wear. So that the job of risk professional varies from place to place and setting to setting. In addition, when you think about the role of risk professional, you're looking at risks in all those different areas, both those clinical and non-clinical, those enterprise risks, which is an immense volume of knowledge, and it creates a steep learning curve. And on a side note, from my perspective, it actually creates a lot of anxiety because there's a somewhat of an expectation to be able to know everything, to hit the ground running. And I know what I was really worried about is I was going to miss something, that there was going to be a risk that I didn't foresee. Something happened that maybe there was a signal that I didn't detect or wasn't attuned to, and I was going to miss something and do a bad job. And that's a scary place to be. So that really drives home the point of why we need to onboard our risk professionals. So the reasons new risk professionals are struggling are due to a number of factors. So when you look at the degree programs that are out there, there are very few formal degree programs or certificates for that healthcare risk professionals. There's also approximately 6,000 hospitals and more than 9,000 ambulatory surgery centers in the US, and thousands upon thousands of medical offices. And currently, there's only about 2,600 certified healthcare risk professionals. And that's including some that have retired that are no longer working in these organizations. So that results in a very, very limited number of mentorship options for these new hires. This, along with the variability between healthcare facilities and the associated ambiguity of those roles and responsibilities of the risk professional, combined with the complexity of healthcare in general, creates that steep learning curve that we just looked at. So if your risk professionals are struggling during that onboarding period, this can result in poor job performance and decreased engagement, which can lead to burnout, and the risk professionals might consider leaving the role, like we saw in that note in that discussion board. And they might want to return to the clinical practice, go back to the bedside. That's easy, right? I know this. I've been doing this for years. It's hard, but I can go back to that because I understand it. This leads to increased costs to the organization for the recruitment and training of new employees. And most importantly, nobody's doing the work. Those risks that I was worried about missing, there's not going to be anyone worrying about them because no one's going to be in that role until that role is filled again. So when we look at our profession, do we provide a structured approach to learning the role of risk professional, or has it been more of a trial by fire? So what is needed is to rethink how we prepare new risk professionals by designing and delivering learner-centric, customized, and intentional education using a mixed method approach. So what do learners want? And we think about adult learners, they value education they perceive to be beneficial. They might want to obtain a new skill, maintain a competency or a certification. They might be looking to switch careers or a promotion. They might be wanting to go to that next level in their career, right? Learners, especially in healthcare, They want content delivered in a method that is conducive to learning, which includes having a low learner burden, right? We don't want everything to take an incredible amount of time. Sitting in a room for an 8-hour, for an 8-hour day to try to learn is not conducive to learning, right? And then thinking learners want that knowledge and skills that can be immediately applied to their daily work. The work has to be relevant and have context, right? And then when we think about healthcare professionals in general, especially ones with licenses, they want to make sure they protect their license, right? So when we think about that, we have a lot of motivation to be really engaged learners. So we need to figure out how are we going to engage them the best way. So this leads us to designing a risk professional onboarding curriculum. And I say curriculum, it's not as rigorous as it sounds. But this onboarding education should be designed for the adult professional with opportunities for like self-study, observation, and hands-on practice. All three of those are very supportive of retaining that education. And when I think of professional education, I consider how I can make it sticky, meaning long after attending a webinar or reading something that I wrote, how can I ensure that the learner has the essential takeaways from the education? What story can I include? What visuals can I use? Because all of these tools help professional educators deliver the message. So these are the same principles that apply to professional onboarding education, and why just reading a journal article or reading an 8-inch binder full of emails back and forth is just not enough. We need opportunities to use what we have just learned. This is competency. Competency is knowledge in action. So what is the evidence here, right? Why am I up here talking about this? We want to know about the evidence. So when we look at the causes of decreased engagement and turnover, they're pretty well studied. So research from other professions tells us that formal onboarding programs are linked to increased job satisfaction, performance, and engagement, as well as higher retention rates. For example, one of the studies by the Society for Human Resources Management found that new employees are 58% more likely to still be at a company 3 years later if they had completed a structured onboarding process. This isn't just the new employee orientation. That's not it. This is a structured onboarding process. But unfortunately, when a Gallup poll surveyed employees, they said that 12% feel their organization, only 12%, did a good job of onboarding new employees. That's inclusive of everyone, right? So this echoes those polling results that we discussed at the beginning of this presentation. So before we begin looking at how this is done, let's talk about how we learn best. So we learn best through educational methods that engage the learner in active learning. Although passive learning is not without its purpose. So most of the learning that you and I engage in daily is passive by reading papers, journal articles, newspaper articles, visiting online resources. However, we retain more through active learning when we're part of the learning. This learning by doing, either seeking out learning activities, like self-directed activities, observing others, and then trying something new for the first time, combined with opportunities for self-reflection and discussions with peers for key takeaways. All of those are active learning strategies. So ideally, in designing a risk professional onboarding education, we want to incorporate more opportunities for this active learning. And so going back to what the learners need, they need education to be relevant to daily work and skills that can be immediately applied. So using a mixed methods approach that is active learning heavy, we're going to look at what an onboarding program could look like. So there are a number of considerations when designing an educational plan. So if I'm designing an onboarding program, I want to think about the type of healthcare setting. What setting does this educational plan serve? Are you a large healthcare system with numerous risk professionals, or is this an ambulatory care center, or is this just a practice, an individual physician practice where someone's working there and they're managing the risks at that physician practice? Does your organization's culture support the development of this program? Everything kind of does boil down to culture because you need to get buy-in, right? So how easy would it be to obtain this buy-in? Does your leadership demonstrate that they value education? And are they more proactive? Do they see this value? Does the organization engage in traditional or enterprise risk management? Is your organization risk tolerant or risk adverse? It's important to understand if you're looking at just clinical risk management or looking at managing risks for reputational harm and technology risks and the human capital risks, all of those ERM domains will roll up into there. So understanding what's included, what is the volume of information that they actually need to know? And then do you have the available resources to support the development of such a program? So what is the length of time for your onboarding period and how much time can be dedicated to these intentional learning activities? Do you have time to create it, but also do you have time to conduct these activities? Who else can help, right? There are other people in your organization that can help with onboarding risk professionals because those risk professionals wear a lot of hats and there's a lot of crossover, right? So do you have support from leadership and other departments or maybe a more experienced risk professional that is available to help with this? Consider if your organization has education on an LMS, or do they have an external education provider? Do you have past ASHRM publications or access to those journals or other journals? And then finally, what is the minimum, required experience for this role? Thinking back to who did you bring into this role? Who did you hire? What did they come in with? What did they know? Did you require them to have a CPHRM certification? For those of you, that's the risk management certification. So does it require them to have that certification before they even start? Do they need to have 10 years of experience on hire? Then maybe your onboarding program is going to look a little bit different than one that does not require certification, or where you're doing a homegrown program where you're grabbing one of the more experienced nurses to come and join your risk team. All of that rolls into really, what you're going to need from your onboarding program. And then what are those essential job skills of your risk professional? For example, some risk professionals, they manage claims where others do not deal with that at all. So really looking at what are those bulleted points in the risk professional job description that you are going to need to develop this program to support. Because we want them to be successful, right? That's the ultimate goal. So imagine this scenario. You're at a 250-bed community hospital that is on their journey to high reliability and recently lost just culture training for all of their leadership. Your hospital risk management uses an ERM approach and is risk adverse. They set intentional improvement goals and are moving towards being proactive by facilitating increasing numbers of FMEAs and have recently launched technology that collates findings for risk rounding and allows the team to assign responsibility for follow-up. The position, the risk professional position, requires 3 years of experience in healthcare. A CPHRM and a master's is preferred, but not required. The system director of risk management is on site 1 day per week, but there are leadership from quality, patient relations, medical affairs, and compliance that are available and willing to help with onboarding. And a senior risk professional from the nearby ambulatory care center is available and will manage the day-to-day needs of onboarding. So on the next slide, we are going to talk about some of those essential responsibilities for the risk professional. So prior to devising your onboarding education plan, you'll need to identify those responsibilities of the role by taking into consideration your professional practice setting and the job description, right? And so I've taken a stab at devising some essential responsibilities for our scenario hospital, but let's imagine you are creating an educational plan for your risk professionals. What would you want to include? So consider, what are those essential points of knowledge? What do they need to know? And what do they need to be able to do to be a risk professional? So go ahead and scan the QR code, and we're going to call these competencies. What are those competencies that are needed by risk professionals? Even if you're not a risk professional and not in this role, what do you think that they need to know or be able to do? Risk analysis, that's very important. Strategic thinking, that's a really good one. Difficult one to teach though, but it can be taught. What else? You can enter as many options as you want. Okay, so it's FMEA, how to support their team. That's a really good one. Thinking about those soft skills, thinking about how do we create psychological safety, right? We're dealing with some really sensitive things and risk. And so that's actually the first time anyone's put in one of those soft skills in here. That how do you communicate with your team? How do you create that psychological safety? Very good. Event reviews, being a problem solver. Excellent. Okay. Communication, excellent, excellent. We're still waiting. It's like a couple more people, but go ahead and enter your thoughts. I'll be able to review these after the session is over, so I appreciate. Okay, so let's look at this list here. There might be some of the same. This is kind of, I've got to take it a stab at identifying what some of those essential responsibilities might be. So this might be kind of like Family Feud. So you get a prize if you guessed one of the things on this slide here. Okay, so knowledge. We want them to understand the risk management process, like maybe what the claims management process looks like. We want them to know what our sentinel event policy is. What are the elements of a medical malpractice claim, right? Those are essential knowledge of a risk professional, right? And then what do I want them to be able to do? I want them to be able to conduct an FMEA, lead an RCA, and that's where those, those communication and those, those soft skills come into play in creating that psychological safety. I want them to be able to develop an event timeline and write a high-level summary of an adverse event that might go to those sentinel event review committees. So yeah, so all of those are some of the things that we might want them to know and be able to do throughout, their onboarding period, right? So these are some things we're going to work on to try to teach them, right? So once you've outlined the what, we need to establish the how by creating a timeline to organize the learning goals and set expectations for the learner. So based on the responsibilities of the role, you determine that the knowledge and skills you want the learner to possess by these certain timeframes. And so here we have at 3 months, we want them to be able to conduct a risk assessment, identify events that require investigation. We want them to be able to prioritize events for corrective action planning, and maybe coach some managers on just culture, like reinforce what just culture is. So that's, I think, pretty manageable in those first 3 months. By 6 months, we want them to be able to go to new employee orientation and talk about risk management, event reporting, right? Maybe investigate and prepare a summary of an adverse or sentinel event. We might want them to be able to conduct a hazard vulnerability assessment. Maybe, maybe not. That might be more of a 1-year skill, but maybe that's not their 6-month timeline. Maybe they're a little bit more advanced. And then, responding to a grievance, because when there's a grievance, risk professionals frequently get involved and they need to know the language that is appropriate in that patient response, right? And then by 1 year, we want them to be able to confidently lead an RCA, conduct an FMEA, do analysis of claims, and prepare some executive summaries for the C-suite, and then maybe lead an improvement project. So next, you'll start to outline a weekly educational plan by beginning with those knowledge and skills that you want them to have attained by those first 3 months. And so each week, you'll ask these 2 questions. What do I want them to know? And what do I want them to be able to do? So in answering these 2 questions, you're essentially writing learning goals for that week. So for the purposes of this scenario, I have listed only 2 bullets under each. So I would like the risk professional to know the steps of the risk management process and the difference between a punitive culture and a just culture, right? And when I want them to be able to do at the end of the week, I want them to be able to identify some risks through environmental rounding. And of course, they're going to have a tool, and use the fair and just culture algorithm to provide manager coaching in responding to an event. So let's take a look at some of the activities that we might plan to intentionally meet these learning goals. So here's an example of some of the activities we mapped out for the first week of the risk professional onboarding. So if you recall from our last slide, we want them to know the steps of the risk management process. So I have them watching a video on the risk management process and reviewing the enterprise risk management article from Ashram. And so we have a video on our LMS on the risk management process. Those steps, pretty simple, really quick, but they get in, they get what they need, and they get out. But they're watching and they're learning about those, and it's a little bit more engaging than just reading about it, right? And so, in addition, we wanted the new risk professionals to be able to identify risks through rounding. So we've included a video on the methods of risk identification, and also 3 different opportunities to participate in rounding. So we've got leadership rounds, the environment of care rounds, and then rounding with the risk professional. And then we've also provided them with self-study on that environment of care rounding checklist so that they can be prepared for what they're looking for when they do those EOC rounds. We also wanted the learner to be able to differentiate between a punitive culture and a just culture and apply that incident decision tree. So you can see we've included an article on just culture from the VA and watching a video on culture of safety. We also have included an activity in which the learner will review an event investigation or case study and determine the appropriate course of action using that incident decision tree. So they're actually applying what they've read about into practice, right? They're putting it to work. As you can see, every minute of every day isn't full, and it really shouldn't be, because the nature of healthcare and risk management is that it's predictably unpredictable. So you need to build in time for shadowing, meeting various team members, and allowing time for the risk professional to actually process what they've learned. This time can be used for self-study, policy review, and exploration of electronic health record and event reporting systems. At the end of the week, we've included some time for reflection, as well as some coaching and discussion with that system director who we said was available at the organization weekly. This allows the system director to gauge the progress and provides an opportunity for learning as they discuss some of the activities from the week. So they can say, okay, what do you know? What do you not know? And let me help you fill in those gaps. So in our example, we included a discussion of the rounding findings and in our review of the incident decision tree activity, where they're reviewing the event report and applying the incident decision tree to kind of understand what the appropriate course of action is. And so, and having that discussion and learning about how they approached that activity and where they ended up, you can kind of close the gap in any educational needs that are there. So let's look back at our learning pyramid and see how the activities we selected might land on a learning pyramid. So not too bad. If we look, the majority of our activities fell into what we would classify as an active learning category. They're doing these things, right? And so again, passive learning has its moments, but we really want this to be active learning so it's sticky. That's the best education, is sticky. So I'm going to ask you to workshop this. We've had some opportunities to use the polling, and I'm really going to ask you to engage and scan the QR codes next. So imagine you're creating an onboarding plan for a risk and patient safety role. Okay, think about that for a moment. Think about those 2 questions that I asked you. What do you want them to know and be able to do? Okay, so we're going to scan the QR code. Again, what do you want the new risk professional or risk safety professional to know at the end of the week? That very first week, what is the salient thing you want them to be able feel confident that they know. Where our resources are, right? How to find information, right? Navigation is a hard one. If you are, you're going to make them aware of where all of the salient policies and procedures specific to risk, because risk has their own policies and procedures, right? They have a whole bunch that are specific to that, the sentinel event policy, the adverse event reporting policy, all of those things. So where are those resources? And then also, who can you contact? Who does what at the organization? Some of these are very basic. Who does what and where can you go for help? I get a call, and when I was in risk, I would get a call from an angry patient that made it through the switchboard operator, and they were upset about something that was really outside of my control, but I needed to know how to handle, exactly, how to handle that call. Who could I reach out to for help? Who are my resources? Who are my point of contacts? Who lead each of these departments? I had to also understand the reporting structures and supervision structures of an academic medical center. So if something's going on with a resident, and who is their program director and who is in charge of the surgery department? So there's a lot of nuances that just even basic information that needs to be known for any role, not just for the risk professional. So thinking about that, this is not just for the risk professional. Beyond that, think about how complex it is to be new at an organization. So healthcare is challenging, right? So thinking about what do you want them to be able to do at the end of the week? Now this is that skill. Like I want them to be able to do something. They have a skill. What is some fundamental skill at week 1 where we want them to be able to accomplish? And maybe it is, I want them to be able to adequately screen a call and direct it to the right person based on the type of complaint that comes through. That's a basic skill, but it's something that they need to know. And so, and know how to do, not just know the knowledge of it, but able to effectively use it. Yep. So yeah, you go around with them, and I want them to be able to tell me, okay, what are some safety risks? What are some things that I saw in the environment? Because we all walk through an environment, we all have eyes, whether or not we're a risk or safety professional or not. If we're in healthcare for any amount of time, we've all been able to walk through an environment and say, hey, that looks dangerous, right? That looks unsafe. I want them to be able to use that lens and say, wow, getting, those cords, they shouldn't be hanging there. And that equipment is an obstacle if there's a fire hazard, right? Or this code card hasn't been checked in over a month and it's got a broken lock on it. Yeah, all of those things are very key, very simple things, but those are critical skills you need to be able to perform in that role and to identify risks. So yes, verbalize, what did they see? What did they see and why is this important? And then not only identifying what those risks are and being able to talk about those observations, but maybe even going further and saying, who do I need to direct that information to? So is this a nurse manager issue? Is this a facilities or engineering issue? Does materials management need to be involved? What kind of issues did I see? And how can I correct those issues? What is the follow-up action on those? Most importantly, because we all find things in rounding, right? You find many, many different risks in rounding, but it's what you do with that information that's important, and how do you correct that so it doesn't go on to harm a patient. Okay. So once you've outlined the learning plan, you can customize it to the learner further. For if you say, maybe your new hire has been a risk professional for a year at another organization, right? Maybe they've been in healthcare for, 20 years. And so they have some, requisite knowledge and skills that maybe allow you to move or remove individual components from the learning plan, or start the learner at a more advanced portion, just tailoring it to what's different in what you used to do to what we currently do here. So maybe they start at their 6-month period. They're providing, they're going to be able to jump into these things a little bit quicker. And so maybe your 6 months is really your 3 months. And then you can develop some new timetables for some more advanced skills. And your 1 year is going to look very different for someone who's complete novice to somebody who comes in as an intermediate or with an advanced skill set. So by providing this onboarding curriculum that's both learner-centric, it's customized and intentional, and combining those mixed learning modalities, you get improved job performance. They're going to be better. They're going to be better at identifying risk. They're going to be better at even better reporting and following up on those action items and getting things improved, right? So they're going to be better at doing the work. They're going to be less burnt out. They're not going to want to leave and go back to the bedside. They're not going to just feel frustrated every day, or on Sunday night feel like they, feel distressed because they have to go in to a job where they feel uncomfortable, that they don't feel like they know what they're doing, that they don't feel like they're flailing, and that they're unsupported, and that, worst case scenario, something bad's going to happen and they're not going to be on top of it. And that goes back to what my fears were. We want to make sure that we give them confidence so that they can do their job better. And education is that critical tool that can help do that for our risk professionals. And when we equip them with this knowledge, because knowledge is power, and we decrease that burnout, and we don't have them thinking about leaving for another organization. We don't want to lose that expertise. We don't want them to go somewhere else with that skill set, because not only are we going to have somebody not doing the work of risk professional, there's all those costs associated with going out, putting those job postings back out, advertising the role, onboarding somebody brand new, starting from scratch again. So we need to do it right. We need to do it right the first time. Give them a leg up. Give them those skill sets to be confident and knowledgeable and competent, right? So we're going to reduce the costs. When we do this, when we effectively manage risk, not only are we decreasing turnout, not only are we decreasing turnover and those costs, but we're actually more effectively managing our risks. So when you effectively manage your risks, guess what? We are decreasing those costs, because those things that might go on to be a lawsuit might have been prevented. We might have identified and put some corrective actions in place before harm occurs, right? That's our goal, right? And then we have a risk professional that is thriving despite that steep learning curve. So we're setting them up for success, and we want this. We want them to thrive. So with that, I want to thank you for spending your time with me today. And I appreciate all of you who are here and were able to participate, engage with the polling options, and participate in the session. With that, I will open it up to anyone who has some questions. Go ahead and I think you can type some questions into the QR code. There is a question and answer box somewhere if need be, but otherwise, that's what I've got for you today. And thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And as a reminder, you can use the questions in the QR code or in the QR pane to the right of your screen. So I've got one from Kendall in Iowa. She wonders, what is the best way to identify or grow new risk management professionals? So I think she's looking at a mentorship potential here.
Yeah, mentorship is a really good one. If you have so thank you, Kendall, that's a really good question. So there's several sessions I've been to that are grow your own programs, where you really can partner a less experienced or someone who's brand new to risk with somebody who really understands the role of risk. But they need to be a good communicator. They need to be patient. Thinking about who you match them with, those mentorship opportunities that are going to be the coach. They need to have those requisite skills to be able to teach others, because you can't teach others It's not something that's a skill that just comes naturally. You need to know how to have those difficult conversations because people are going to mess up, right? Someone's going to zig when they should have zagged. It happens in, healthcare practice every day. It happens in risk too. So we need to be compassionate when somebody does make a mistake. We need to, and that's a skill that needs to be developed in even the most experienced of risk professionals, in helping them to develop those, partnering them with a mentor that can coach them, that can provide feedback that is coming from a place of inquiry. So I appreciate, and I noticed that you did this, but when I do this, I generally tend to do this. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you made this decision? So coming from a place of inquiry versus, guess what I'm thinking? Because that's not how you learn. Somebody that is new to this field or any field, if they have no experience at all, if they're coming in as a blank slate and you ask them a question like, so what do you think? Well, they don't have any knowledge to pull from. They don't have that foundational level of information. So a question like that can be incredibly frustrating, and it can make the person who's on the other end feel defensive. It can make them more reluctant to engage in these dialogues and participate, or even share when they did something wrong. They're gonna not want to look stupid, and so partnering your new team member with somebody that's experienced, but also a good coach. And they might not be the most experienced person, but if they have some of those other skills that are more valuable, they're going to make it easier for that new risk professional to learn. And that's key. And then looking at what resources are you providing to them? What do you have available for someone to learn about risk? A lot of organizations cannot afford to send their entire risk team to an annual conference. In an annual conference, you only get a smattering of information, and it's in a webinar format, and it's, and it might not be topics that are, intended for the novice, for somebody that's coming in blank. So you might need some outside education materials to be, brought in and, to help support that fundamental education. Because again, it's not something that when you go to a conference, people are presenting at conferences that are topics that are way above the novice risk professional role. And so, providing that foundational knowledge will make them appreciate and use the education that when they do go to the conference eventually, that it'll mean something. They'll have something to reflect on. They'll have that foundational level of understanding so that they can take those new skills at a conference and apply them when they get back to their organization. So thank you, Kendall. That was a great question.
So Robin, I'm going to follow up on that one. As one who attends conferences for CIHQ, how do you select conferences to go to? And do you have any favorites for risk management professionals?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of biased because I'm on the education, chairing the education committee for our New England Regional Healthcare Risk Management Conference here. So it's a regional one. We also have our American Society for Healthcare Risk Management Annual Conference. And they all, there's value, there's conferences. Look at those regional conferences. Those regional conferences sometimes provide more foundational level of education. It also provides that networking. So maybe you're not getting what you need out of an educational session, but there's going to be people there that work in the area that you can partner with and learn more about the profession. You can learn more and kind of feel like, oh yeah, I'm in the same boat. You can make some of those great connections in risk with some of your colleagues that are working at other organizations, and you can share resources together. You can say, hey, how have you approached some of these issues? How have you tackled this problem? I am looking for a policy on this, and that's really great. So looking at your regional conferences, I'm here in Connecticut, so of course I'm in the New England regional, but there's risk management conferences all over the country. And then our annual conference is, in September, October every year. And those sessions, they're really looking for, intermediate and advanced level education. People that usually attend those have been in risk for a long time. I've noticed that there is a lot of senior leadership at those conferences as well. So those topics tend to be more of the enterprise risk management level, expert level, advanced level competencies. However, there are some, they do offer some workshops that help you prepare for the CPHRM exam. There's a lot of great opportunities for education. And then our company, our parent company, actually has webinars that we put out on topics that are related to risk that are open to the public. So through our medical malpractice insurance company, parent company, Coveris, we follow them on LinkedIn and go and check out, because we provide continuing education credits for some of those webinars that are, so there's a lot of places to get education and to learn, and so depending on your budget, and depending on what your needs of your staff, pick the conference and pick the education that's really best for your educational needs of your staff, but also looking at what are they offering at the session. I like to, sometimes you don't really get to see the agenda too far in advance before you've made those budgets, but take a look at what's on the agenda. Are these, is there a good match? Is there a good skill mix there? And does that make sense for our entire team to attend, or just a couple people to attend?
You took that recommendation right away from me, Robin. I was going to encourage these folks to find you on LinkedIn and connect, and definitely stay in touch. So it looks like there are no more questions in the queue. If you have any additional questions, be sure to reach out to Robin, and we'd like to thank them again for partnering with us to present this webinar. Thank you. And there is her email. Wonderful. I'll hang on the line until attendees drop off. Robin, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for having me.